Shavua Tov, everyone. We are starting to look at Parashat Miketz, next week's Parsha. So if someone can, does someone have the page over there and can share with everyone else, let everyone know where we should be looking? We're at the very beginning of Parashat Miketz. Okay. So today we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to look at three different small midrashim, and we're going to look a little bit at how the Midrash looks at Paro's dream, and kind of like a bit of the back and forth between Paro and and the Midrash is going to go a little bit into what is going on in Paro's mind a little bit, but we'll see as we go. We're going to start off by reading the psukim, reading the verses, and when we get to the verses that the Midrashim are going to focus on, I'm going to point them out and ask you to think of questions. But it's important for us to see, even though we're all pretty familiar with the story, it's important for us to see the entire context. So again, I apologize, I'm reading from a different version of what you guys are looking at, if you're looking at the stone Chumash, but it should be similar enough. Okay. It happened at the end of 2 years to the day, Pharaoh was dreaming that, behold, he was standing over the river. When, behold, out of the river there emerged 7 cows, of beautiful appearance and robust flesh, and they were grazing in the marshland. Then, behold, 7 other cows emerged after them out of the river, of ugly appearance and gaunt flesh, and they stood next to the cows on the bank of the river. By the way, just remember that point, okay? Please remember. And they stood next to the cows on the bank of the river. The cows of ugly appearance and gaunt flesh ate the 7 cows of beautiful appearance and robust. And Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamt a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain were sprouting on a single stalk, healthy and good. And behold, 7 ears, thin and scrunched by the east wind, were growing after them. Then the thin ears swallowed up the 7 healthy and full ears. Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Okay, now we're in verse 8. This is the verse I want us to be focusing on with our questions. And it was in the morning, his spirit was agitated. So he sent and summoned all the necromancers of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh related his dream to them, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. Okay, that's the verse I want us to focus on. Just 1 second. Okay. Now, before we ask questions on that last verse, right, and that's the verse I want us, that he called all the necromancers and all the wise men, he told the dream to them, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. Now, I want to jump forward a little bit, and so obviously we know what happens. The chamberlain, one of the minister who had previously been imprisoned, he comes to Pharaoh and says, "Oh, there was a Hebrew slave with us in prison, and he interpreted our dreams, and exactly what he said came true." Pharaoh calls him, right? And Pharaoh, the king of basically the ultimate superpower of the ancient world, calls this lowly. And we have to remember, this is not just this is an imprisoned slave who is a foreigner, meaning this is a criminal foreign slave. Okay, you can't get to a lower social standard than that. This is a foreign slave who is a criminal and who hasn't been imprisoned. So Pharaoh, the great Pharaoh, calls the lowliest person, probably the lowliest person in his entire empire, and calls him, and they bring him and they shave his head and they give him They dress him in clean clothes. And as we know, Yosef, can everyone hear me? Yeah. Yosef interprets the dream for him. So let's read that quickly. We're looking at verse 25. Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is a single one. What God is about to do, he has told to Pharaoh. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. It is a single dream. Now the 7 emaciated and bad cows who emerged after them, they are 7 years, as are the 7 emaciated ears scorched by the east wind. There shall be 7 years of famine. It is this matter that I have spoken to Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he has shown to Pharaoh. Behold, 7 years are coming, a great abundance throughout all the land of Egypt. Then 7 years of famine will arise after them, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. The famine will ravage the land, and the abundance will be unknown in the land in the face of the subsequent famine, for it will be terribly severe. As for the repetition of the dream to Pharaoh 2 times, it is because the matter stands ready before God, and God is hastening to accomplish it. Now, let Pharaoh seek out a discerning and wise man and set him above the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed and let him appoint overseers to the land, and he shall prepare the land of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. And let them gather all the food of those approaching good years. Let them amass grain under Pharaoh's authority for good in the cities and safeguard it. The food will be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine, which will befall the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish in the famine. The matter appeared good in Pharaoh's eyes, in the eyes of all of his servants. Okay, here we go. This is the verse. This is the second verse I want to focus on. Pharaoh said to his servants, could we find verse 38. Pharaoh said to his servants, could we find another like him, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? So the 2 verses that the Midrash that we're going to see is going to focus on is those 2 verses. The first, which was verse 8, and it was in the morning his spirit was agitated, so he sent and summoned all the necromancers of Egypt and all of its wise men. Pharaoh related his dream to them, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. Any questions on that? And I apologize, that's it. I'm done reading at great length from the psukim themselves. Any questions? But it's important to see the context, and later on you'll see why. Anything strange about this verse, verse 8? Let's read it again. And it was in the morning, his spirit was agitated, so he sent and summoned all the necromancers of Egypt and all of its wise men. Pharaoh related his dream to them, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. What? But no, because the question is why are the dreams mentioned as if they were right after the other? There were 2 different dreams. Yes, the 2 different dreams, they took place in the same night. He had a dream. It upset him, or it rattled him, it caused him to wake up, and he realized this was a significant dream, or he wondered about it, fell back to sleep, and had the other dream. Anything jump out at us in this verse? Yes. Yes. Interesting. Very interesting point. I'm just going to repeat for online. You're saying that in verse 8 it says he called all the necromancers and all of the wise men, but then after Yosef interprets the dream for him, he turns to his advisors and he says, oh, have you seen such a man who has the spirit of, let's see, what's the exact language? Let's make sure I get it right. A man in whom is the Spirit of God. Is this, so if there's such a meaning, it looks like Pharaoh is is aware of a third category of a type of person. So why doesn't it say he called all the necromancers, all of the wise men, and all the men, who have the Spirit of God? Excellent question. I'd say the simplest. Maybe we might find an answer for it later on when we get to the Midrash. If I had to answer it on a simple level, I'd say there's two options. One is that that's the way he understands necromancers, and wise men. But another option is maybe something about what Yosef said, or the way he said it, is one of the things we're going to discuss, caused Pharaoh to realize there's a whole different category. Meaning, something about what Yosef said, or something about Yosef, I would say, and this is I think what is hiding in the Midrash, we'll see this as well, is Pharaoh, he called everyone he could think of to interpret the dream. Everyone that he knew of, any type of person that he knew of that could solve a dream. And suddenly Yosef comes and is able to succeed where they all failed, which is also something we're going to have to figure out. What does that mean, they all failed? And suddenly you say, wow, look at that. This is not a wise man. This is not a necromancer. You know what this is? This is something new. This is a man whose Spirit of God is in him. And I will use your question, and I'll just change it a little bit, which is, what did Yosef already say that is so, like, if you think about it, it doesn't sound like such a brilliant interpretation. To say that cows, which represent, the healthy cows versus skinny cows, and very satiated or very healthy looking wheat versus very thin wheat, to come and say that these things represent, nourishment and plenty and famine, doesn't sound like such a brilliant interpretation. Right? So, what? Why? Why do you feel it's such a brilliant interpretation? Okay, so you're saying that the brilliance of Yosef lie in the fact that he was able to unify the messages. Okay, but even if that's the case, to come and to say that healthy looking wheat represents wealth or plenty, and that dried up, scorched wheat represents famine, is pretty logical. So what is he so blown away from? So let's leave that open right now. I want to see, we have any other questions? Yes. Well, that's an interesting point. You said no one else said this, but the truth is, in the verses themselves, we don't know what the others said. Doesn't tell us what they said, if they even said anything. Yes. Okay, so excellent. That's one of the points that I really think is an important point here, which I think the Midrash will relate to as well, which is Yosef. Like, who does Yosef think he is? Yosef is a nobody. Yosef is less than a nobody. Yosef has been in prison. Okay, so he's had a pretty, relatively speaking, relative to a prison in ancient Egypt, he's had it a little bit, smoother. But I don't know the exact conditions in ancient, Egyptian prisons, from 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago. But I imagine that it's not luxurious and it's not very nice. And he is a foreign criminal slave who's been imprisoned. And it's not just that the way he speaks to Pharaoh is that he seems to be giving him advice. Right? Imagine it. Imagine for a second the situation. I'd imagine that the moment he opens up his mouth to give advice, he'd be, at least picked up and just thrown back in prison, if not much worse. And what, this lowly, slave, what is so one question is what would prompt Yosef to come up and start giving the king of the superpower of the day, of the world, start giving him advice about how to manage his economy? And second, what would cause Paro to be so blown away by it that he immediately goes and appoints him to be a second in command? It's unbelievable. Now I want to go back to wait just 1 second. I want to go back to verse 8. Okay, and I want to. Yes, please. Right. So you're saying that, I'll just repeat it for those who are watching. You're saying that Yosef's kind of core characteristic is not that of a slave. He was born into an aristocratic family, or if not aristocratic, at least a very independent, very independent and educated and and confident family. He was raised that way. He was educated that way. We see that everywhere he goes, he seems to have an air about him that causes other people to be impressed with him, to trust him. So he's saying, and therefore, even when he stands before Pharaoh, he does not see himself as a lowly, enslaved, criminal foreigner, but he sees himself as the son of Yaakov, the grandson of Isaac, the great-grandson of Abraham. That very well may be. That very, very well may be. Okay, let's look at verse 8 again, because at the very end of the verse there's a strange phrase. Okay, so it says he called all of the necromancers of Egypt and all of its wise men, which is also a bit strange. What's all the necromancers and all the wise men? Just say he called all the wise men. There seems to be a very, an exaggeration here. But let's continue. Pharaoh related to them the dream, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. That's a strange phrase. What is strange about that phrase? But none could interpret them for Pharaoh. What? What does that mean, no one could interpret them for Pharaoh? That means that all of the wise men and all the necromancers just stood there and said, we don't know. Meaning, if I turn to you and I said, I had a dream last night. That I got a brand new car. I won a car in the lottery. Beautiful car. And the next day, a lightning bolt came and destroyed my car. I don't know what it means. I imagine every single person here would say, well, maybe it means, what comes easy, goes easy, cherish things while you have them. I don't know. You'd come up with something. These are professionals. This is their job. Their job is to explain things to the king, is to interpret his dreams, to read the stars for him, I don't know. What does that mean? None of them could interpret them for Pharaoh. So you're saying it's not. So you're saying it's not that they couldn't interpret them, because then it would say, but none could interpret them. It doesn't say, but none can interpret them. It says, no, none can interpret them for Pharaoh, which means that they did interpret them, but Pharaoh was not satisfied by the explanations, right? That's what it seems to be, and that is, of course, exactly what the Midrash says. So, let's look at the Midrash. We're looking at the first one on the page. So there's I brought here 3 short Midrashim. They all connect, in my mind, they all connect. The first touches upon a question that we did not ask because in English it doesn't seem difficult. But in Hebrew it is, and I'll explain. I'll start reading the Midrash and then I'll explain. The Midrash says the following: and Pharaoh dreams. After I sent you guys the source sheet, I looked at it again and I decided to translate it a little bit differently. And Pharaoh dreams, says the Midrash, and do not all people dream, I wonder? Says the Midrash. I have to explain this. If you look at the Hebrew says Ufaro cholem. That is present tense. Okay? It's a very strange phrasing. If you were to go back and look at, let's say, when Yaakov dreamt, it says, it says, just a second, I'll look, just to make sure that I don't misquote it. Just a second. It says Vayachalom. Okay? Vayachalom means, and he dreamt. Vayachalom Yaakov. Right. No. So in Yaakov, it says, Vayachalom Yaakov. Okay? Yaakov had a dream. Whereas over here it says Ufaro cholem in present tense. It's a strange phrasing. It's very, very rare. Usually, this might even be the only case. I'm not sure. If not the only case, it's very, very rare. It should say Vayachalom Paro. Paro had a dream. But over here it says, if I were to actually translate it literally, it would be Pharaoh dreams. And Pharaoh dreams, as if it's telling you that a quality about, meaning when it says Vayachalom Yaakov dreamt, it's telling you an event. Whereas the literal phrasing of here, Ufaro cholem, literally means, and Pharaoh dreams. It's not describing an event. It's describing a state of being, almost. So the Midrash picks up on this very strange phrasing, which is very unique. And it says, and Pharaoh dreams. And do not all people dream, I wonder? You're telling me as if there's something special about Pharaoh that he dreams. Not necessarily over here. He dreams. Says the Midrash, rather, the dream of a king is a dream of the entire world. Interesting. The Midrash goes on to say, and Pharaoh dreams, said Rabbi Yochanan, the wicked exist upon their gods. And Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he was standing upon the river. So why is this considered that the wicked exist upon their God? Right? It says, the Midrash says, the wicked exist upon their gods, meaning they see themselves as superior to their gods. They see themselves as gods. They see themselves as above anyone else, even above whatever they believe in, above their own ideals, their beliefs. They see themselves as gods. The proof is that Pharaoh dreamt, and behold, he was standing upon the river. Why does that verse prove that Pharaoh thinks he's a god? What? Correct. Right, because they believed that the Nile was a deity. So if he dreams that he is standing upon the river, then it's as if he's standing above his own God. Okay? And then the Midrash goes on to say, but the righteous, their God stands upon them. And behold, Hashem was standing upon him. Who is that said? Where is that said? About Yaakov. When Yaakov dreams and he sees the ladder, and it says that God is standing upon him. So, when the wicked, how do the meaning what is the Midrash doing here? It's coming and saying, on the one hand, it's saying Pharaoh's dream is not a nothing dream. When Pharaoh dreams, it's a dream of the whole world. And on the other hand, it's saying Pharaoh is wicked. Even in his dream, he's still, even though he is dreaming a dream that is relevant for the whole world, and through him, through Pharaoh, something which is universal is happening, something that affects the entire world is happening through Pharaoh. Even so, that doesn't change the fact that he's wicked. Okay. So what did the Midrash do here? The Midrash on the one hand is telling us that Pharaoh here is not just Pharaoh. Pharaoh here is a vehicle for something much, much greater. On the other hand, it's telling us that that doesn't change the fact that he could still be just as wicked as we thought he was. He still sees himself as above everyone and everything. Okay. Any comments or questions? I said today we're doing it a little bit differently than we usually do it. Any questions? Comments? Okay. So far yes, please. You're right. We do not know if this is the same Pharaoh as Yetziat Mitzrayim. Logic would dictate that it is not. Right? Logic would dictate it is not, simply because between Joseph's time and the Exodus from Egypt, you're talking about a few hundred years. So logic would. This is several generations beforehand. So you're right. There's nothing to indicate that this Pharaoh actually was wicked. But even so, the Midrash calls him wicked, which is always right. What we always do is we have a question on the verse. We look at the commentator, in this case the Midrash. We have an answer, but that leads us to new questions. And those new questions, a little soon, once we gather it from all the other Midrashim, will lead us to the deeper understanding of what the Midrash is trying to do here, or what assumptions it is relying on. So you're asking a good question, which is, why would the Midrash, based on what is the Midrash saying he's wicked? Why mention that he's wicked? Why is that important? And why is that, where are you getting that from? Why is that significant? Especially after you already said, Paro's dream is the dream of the entire world. So doesn't it seem a little contradictory to come and say that if Pharaoh is the vehicle a dream that is being given to the entire world, doesn't it seem a little contradictory to come and say, oh, and he's really wicked because he sees himself as above as above everything and everyone, even above God. Okay. Now we're going to the next Midrash. Okay, the next Midrash is going to talk about, right, the fact that that as we said, they couldn't solve them for Pharaoh. But we ourselves understood that it seems, the phrasing of the verse seems to denote that they did solve it, they did give him solutions, they just weren't acceptable to him. So the Midrash, this would be a classic thing for the Midrash to come and say, well, if they gave him answers, what answers did they give? And that's where the Midrash comes in, where there are things that the verse is hinting towards, but is not telling us. That is where the Midrash comes in and gives us, fills in the blanks, because that's what we want to know. What did they say? Did they stand there saying nothing? Or did they give solutions and he just didn't like them? So let's read. And he sent for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. Rabbi Yeshua from Sachnin said, in the name of Rabbi Levi, they could interpret it, but their voice was not accepted to his ears. 7 good cows, now telling us what their interpretations were. 7 good cows, 7 daughters you will father. This is not very politically correct, right? 7 good cows, 7 daughters you will father. 7 bad cows, 7 daughters you will bury. One could be troubled here why cows is the analogy for daughters, but that's what the Midrash said. And also they said, 7 good stalks, 7 kingdoms you will conquer. 7 bad stalks, 7 provinces will rebel against you. So, first question we ask, did the Midrash, did the commentator answer the question? Yes. Okay, our question was, okay, did they say nothing? Did they answer? And if they answered, what did they answer? Okay, so we have the Midrash comes in, fills in the blanks. But what question, after we read the Midrash, okay, it answered an answer. What question does the Midrash now lead us to? What's the question that we want to ask on the Midrash? Okay, maybe that's what? Only one answer? Okay. What other questions you would ask? Yeah. Right. And an immediate question is, why did he not accept these answers? I'm sorry, but they sound just as reasonable as Yosef's. Just as reasonable. Right? Again, excusing the fact, that cows is the analogy for daughters. But, what is the explanation of personal tragedy, of loss, any worse, any less logical than saying there'll be a famine, or that 7 provinces will rebel against him? That makes a lot of sense. It fits. So why did he not accept them? And why? What about Yosef's interpretation is so much better than these that would cause them to say, wow, their interpretation, garbage. Can't be the interpretation of the dream. Unacceptable. Right? He doesn't accept it. Yosef, this is a man of God. Make him the second most important person in the world. Put the keys of the kingdom in his hands. What's the big deal? Right? Okay. I think at this point we're not going to look yet at the last midrash. If we have time at the end, we'll see it. Okay. Anyone want to take a shot at explaining what is so different about Yosef's explanation and their explanation? As far as the content. Okay, well the question is saying he didn't just give an explanation, he also gave advice about what to do. But the question then is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because we beforehand said it sounds a bit chutzpahdik. Like who do you think you are, Mr. Little Slave? And what? Why did they need Yosef? What? It's such. Let's say that they accept his answer, and his answer, Pharaoh loves his answer for some reason so much more. What? You need Yosef? You don't think on their own they'd be able to come up with the idea? Oh, we should save some of our money we should save the grain from the 7 years for the years of the drought. What? You need to be a man of God to come and say, you should have savings. Doesn't sound like such a brilliant idea, right? Okay, so you're saying if you look at the literal, if you look at how the first thing we're told about Pharaoh is that he dreams. So he's saying maybe Pharaoh was a dreamer, and he wasn't a realist, and he wasn't so connected to the material physical world. He was lived in his dreams. And when Yosef, who's such a practical person, comes and gives him this practical piece of advice, okay. But I think you would agree with me that it's, the chances that Pharaoh, or especially all of his wise men and advisors, and by the way, it doesn't just say that Pharaoh was blown away by him, right? It says they all were blown away by him. If you look, here in verse 37, the matter appeared good in Pharaoh's eyes and in the eyes of all of his servants. What? None of them could have come up. So, if I'm them, the moment this slave finishes giving his interpretation, they say, or he starts giving advice, says, shut up. Who do you think you are? Take him back to his cell. Maybe give him an extra piece of meat. But again, even his advice, it's not this brilliant, tactical, strategic thinking. It's okay, for 7 years you're going to have a lot of money. 7 years you have none. Okay, save up. Okay, so I think the first thing to look at, and I said this class today is going to be slightly different because I'm going to go a little bit outside of the Midrash to try to answer the questions, among other things because I want to connect it, and I should have maybe said this in the promo. I want to connect it to some of the very significant events that happened this past week. You'll see soon what I'm talking about, very soon. So if we look at the content of the topics that the advisors or the necromancers interpreted to him, and what Yosef said, it seems to be very interesting. The first interpreters tell him 7 daughters. You'll have 7 daughters, and they will die. And the second interpreters come and say, and that, in what realm of his life would that event be taking place? In what circle of his life would that be taking place? That would be taking place in his private life, in his home. It really doesn't concern anyone else. And excuse what I'm about to say, especially considering that it's daughters. If Pharaoh has 7 daughters and 7 daughters die, who does it affect? Who does it affect? No one. At most, it affects him. It's a personal tragedy. Maybe it's a big one, maybe it's a small one. This has no effect. Maybe that's why it's daughters. In the ancient world, 7 daughters wouldn't really affect anyone. It's a completely private matter. The second interpretation you will conquer 7 kingdoms, and 7 kingdoms will rebel against you. Who does that affect? The kingdom of Egypt. Okay? That is a national, and I'm saying as far as he's concerned, it involves his nation. Yeah, and the neighboring nations. It's a national tragedy. What about Yosef's interpretation? Who does that affect? Everyone. It's an international event, as we know, because later on, when the famine actually takes place, we see that everyone from all over the world, or the world as we know it from back then, came to Egypt in order to get food. The famine affected everyone, and the plenty of Egypt affected everyone. There seems to be an interesting progression here. They were looking at things, his necromancers, they were looking at things in a very small scale, very short-sighted. Oh, this is, you dream, just like when a person says to us a dream, a person comes here and says, oh, I had this dream and it's really troubling me. And you go, okay, this must be, something has to do with your life or with your family's life. But as we saw in the beginning, the first Midrash, the understanding here is that a king is not a private person. And a king, even if he himself, as a private individual, might not be the greatest human being, might even be filled with hubris and thinks of himself as a god. A person who is the head of the superpower of the world, even though on a personal level they might be wicked or might be filled with hubris, they can still be a vehicle for international events. Through God, God will use that person. That person is in the right place at the right time. And the dreams of a Pharaoh are international events. Hopefully you guys see where I'm going with this. Yes. Now, and Pharaoh and Yosef understood this, again, because Yosef is not speaking from his own heart. He is speaking as a man of God. But there are other differences. So difference number one between Yosef's interpretation and their interpretation is the subject. They're treating him like a private person. Or some of them are treating him like a private person. They see his role as all about just himself or just about his nation. Yosef understands that the head of a superpower, no matter who he is, can and is sometimes a vehicle for geopolitical events. And that is how Yosef understands that this is this type of dream. And understands that Pharaoh, at this moment in time, or maybe at all times, the head of the superpower who's troubled by a dream, Yosef understands this, and Yosef, or Hashem tells him this, however it is. So difference number one is Yosef's interpretation doesn't deal with Pharaoh as a parent or as a leader of a nation, rather as a leader of the world, or as someone whose decisions and actions affect the entire world and who is a vehicle for God's message or God's actions in the world. Second difference between Yosef's interpretation and theirs, the Midrash that does go and basically just tells us, we don't know based on what, okay, maybe it's making it up, maybe it's not, their interpretations are closed circuits, meaning they're very fatalistic. You'll have 7 daughters, which is a positive thing, and 7 daughters will die, negative thing. And that's it. There's no way out of it. It's very deterministic. It's very fatalistic. You'll conquer 7 nations, good for you. 7 provinces will rebel, too bad. Fine, you'll be right back where you are. Nothing gained, nothing lost, ultimately. But it's a closed circle, and that's it. And this is where we come to Yosef's interpretation, which is very different. And there are 2 things that I find very, very interesting. I'll just point out one, because I want to make sure we have enough time. I would come and say, this is not my explanation, there are several other commentators who say this, is that Yosef was not, it's possible to understand, that he was not actually giving any advice. What we think is his advice, he understands as part of the dream. I'll say that again. What we read usually, we'll read it again and we'll see. What we understand usually as him giving Pharaoh advice, one could understand as part of the interpretation itself. Let's read it. We're looking verse 29. Verse 25. Yosef said to Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is a single one. What God is about to do, he has told to Pharaoh. The 7 good cows are 7 years, etc. Verse 29, behold, 7 years are coming, a great abundance throughout all the land of Egypt. Actually, I want to point out something. You know what? We do have time for this because it's actually very, very cool. Look at verse when the dream itself is described. In verse 3. Go back to verse 3. Then behold, 7 other cows emerged after them out of the river, of ugly appearance and gaunt flesh, and they stood next to the cows on the bank of the river. In the dream itself it says, 7 good cows or nice fat cows came up, and then the 7 ugly ones stood next to them. And only after they stood next to them did the skinny ones devour the fat ones. Meaning there's a moment in time where all the cows are standing next to each other. There's a certain point where there are 14 cows. And only afterwards the 7 bad ones eat the good ones. Now look at how Pharaoh describes his dream. Verse 18. And behold, out of the river there emerged 7 cows of robust flesh and beautiful form, and they were grazing in the marshland. Suddenly 7 other cows emerged after them, scrawny and of a very inferior form and of emaciated flesh. I've never seen inferiority like theirs in all the land of Egypt. And the emaciated and inferior cows ate up the first 7 healthy cows. What does it not say? What did he leave out? He left out that they're standing there together side by side. So some commentators come and say, that's why he said he's a man of God, because like the police, when they put releases to the press, he left out some details. He left out some details. There are a few others. There's actually another point that doesn't make a difference right now, where he added in false information that was not in the original dream. And Yosef's interpretation relates to both of those details, the one that he added in and the one that he left out. And some commentators come and say, that's why Pharaoh did not accept the interpretation of the necromancers, because they just interpreted what he said, meaning that they were not inspired by any kind of divine origin, and they did not really know what he dreamt. They were just trying to interpret after the fact, which anyone could do. Whereas Yosef was able to identify and to give an interpretation that has to do with what he left out and what he added in. So that's an interesting point. But what was important for our purposes is the interpretation that Yosef gives. And this is what I wanted to come and say, that it's not the advice, it's interpretation. Let's look at it again. Verse 32. As for the repetition of the dream to Pharaoh 2 times, it is because the matter stands ready before God. Look at this. It is because the matter stands ready before God, and God is hastening to accomplish it. Meaning it's ready, but it's not happening yet. What is that? What does that sound like? When he says, right? God is showing you what he's about to do, but he's not doing it yet. He's going to do it quickly, but he's not doing it yet. What does that mean? How is that different? How is that fundamentally different than what the necromancer said? When I say something bad's going to happen, it's not happening yet. It's about to happen, though. So what do you think to yourself? So there's something I could do about it. The interpretations the Midrash gives, puts in the mouths of the necromancers and wise men, leave no room for human action. It's fatalistic. 7 daughters you will bear, 7 daughters you will bury. 7 nations you will conquer, 7 nations will rebel. That's it. And this fits very, very well with the philosophy and the outlook of the ancient world, especially ancient Egypt. One when you are completely subjugated to fate. You are enslaved to fate. Right? The god, the sun god. It's cyclical. It's the circle of you can't change things. Whereas he's coming saying, and he keeps on saying, God has showed you what he's about to do, what he's going to do. Right? Look at verse 28. What God is about to do, he has shown to Pharaoh. It is because the matter stands ready before God, and God is hastening to accomplish it. And now let Pharaoh seek out discerning wise men and set him over the land of Egypt. This is his interpretation of what God is trying to tell him. God is trying to tell you he's about to do it. So why would God be telling this to Pharaoh? Why would he be revealing what he's about to do but hasn't done yet? So Pharaoh has time to prepare. This is not a fait accompli. This is not something that you cannot do anything about. Otherwise, what's the point in God revealing it to Pharaoh? Just so he's not surprised? What's the point? If, indeed, as the Midrash said, Pharaoh's dreams are dreams of the entire world, and then it makes sense that what Yosef is saying, this is not something just to sit around and say, this is an interesting window into the future. The future is not decided. This is what God is about to do. And therefore God is telling you something. And this is what God is telling you. Do something about it. It is part of the interpretation of the dream. It is part of the interpretation of the fact that the things are equal. That there's a point in time where there are good cows and fat cows, and right next to them are the ugly, unsatiated cows. But no one has eaten anyone yet. They're on equal grounds. They're balanced. It's not decided yet. That's the point. That's the detail that Pharaoh left out. And that is the point, that not only Yosef is able to identify and call out, saying, no, there's a situation where there's nothing yet. There's an in between, but that's the point that Yosef not only identifies, which Pharaoh did not share, but also Yosef makes that the main point of the dream. That's where we are right now, where things are equal, where it could go either way. We could end up as years of just plenty or years of just famine. But remember, the years of plenty ended up not being years of plenty, because all the overwhelming grain, what did they do with it? They put it away. They didn't actually go partying for 7 years. Nothing in the dream came true, at least in Egypt. Not fully. And that's the point of the dream, where the 7 cows and 7 cows, and it's equal. And that's what Yosef says. God is telling you what he's about to do. Which means God is saying to you, do something about it. This is not just Yosef's advice. This is his interpretation of the dream. The interpretation is not a static interpretation. It's an interpretation which says the dream is trying to drive you, Pharaoh, into action and not into acceptance. And this is a fundamentally different way, not only of interpreting a dream, but viewing reality, of not accepting what nature gives you, like they did in ancient Egypt and most of the ancient world. You can't change your fate, you cannot change nature. Rather, you can. And that would explain how it is that Yosef could, presume to give advice, because it's not advice. This is the interpretation. It's a very different reading, but very interesting reading of how to understand the story. And this will also explain why Pharaoh is accepting it. It's not just advice. This is a completely different way, and this would also help Pharaoh understand why is he so troubled by this, and why is it that Pharaoh feels that this is a significant thing. Yes. I'm sorry, excuse me, say that again, I'm sorry. You're saying yes, meaning this is yes. The question was, based on what I'm saying, is Yosef basically trying to position God and man in correct relation to each other? And the answer is yes. The answer is absolutely yes, because the Egyptian outlook, at least the one that is described throughout Tanakh, is one of acceptance of nature, and that of fate, and a deterministic outlook on the world and man's role, place within nature. Whereas the Jewish outlook was, no, just because you're born a slave, that doesn't define who you are. A slave can be a master, and the laws of nature can change also, because there's something there is an element to existence which is not just a materialistic, deterministic consequence and cause and effect. So, yes. So, wait, someone else wanted to say something. No? Okay. Now, I want a very quick. Yes. I didn't catch the last sentence. It's showing how who smart, who is so smart. Yes. Okay, I just want to quickly look at the last paragraph on the page. Very short Midrash, and then I'm gonna get very political. This is also said on the verse that Pharaoh called all of the necromancers and all of the wise men. And so much why? That he called all and all. So much why? Why did he call all of the wise men and all the necromancers? So Yosef will come at the end and receive greatness. Said the Holy One, blessed be he. If he comes at first and solves the dream, he will not be praised. The sorcerers can say to him, could have said to Pharaoh, if you would have asked us, we would have already solved it for you. Rather, he waited until they were God waited until they were exhausted. And meaning they were exhausted, they had exhausted all their solutions. And they removed his spirit. Pharaoh was sick and tired. But he uses a much stronger phrase, like he had no spirit left in him because of how much he was like he was exhausted spiritually from all their attempts. And then Yosef came and returned his spirit to him with this answer. So these three midrashim, if I were to summarize them, the first one taught us the complexity of a political leader, especially one who stands at the head of a superpower. He can be a vehicle for divine greatness, even though he might be filled with hubris. And even so you could have someone who, even though on an individual level they are a very problematic personality, even according to the Midrash, possibly even wicked, but definitely filled with hubris. They see themselves as above everyone and everything. But still, because of the position they are in as the head of a superpower, they can and sometimes will be a vehicle for divine dreams and an execution of those dreams. And the second, the main point of I think that comes out of the second midrash was that all of the advisors regular advisors tend to look at small scale things, tend to look at things that are close to the president's, the king's circle, his house, his own little backyard, and try to see things. Wait just 1 second, and it's all about cause and effect. You do this, this will happen, and we know what the cause and effect will be, and looking at a very small scale. And comes the Midrash and says, no, people of this sort, people at certain points in history, in certain places in the world, certain positions, you need to look at a much larger scale. And you have to look at it as affecting a much bigger scale, and it's not just about cause and effect. There are certain things that transcend natural cause and effect. And the last point is that sometimes the process takes time, and sometimes you need to go through all of the stupid advisors who think they know what they're talking about. And as President Trump said in his speech this week, if something, after you've listened to everyone and you've tried it time and time and time again, suddenly you can get to the conclusion, maybe none of them know what the heck they're talking about, and it's time to try something new. And sometimes only after you've tried all the other things, and you realize that then you can come to the conclusion, all these other explanations are wrong, and then you can finally come to the right one. And when I was looking into this week's Parsha, and after the events of this past week, with President Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel after the disgrace of America's foreign policy for the last 70 years, and finally righting the historical wrong. And it's unbelievable that it took a person like him. And when I was looking in the Midrash, and suddenly it jumped out at me. It says it doesn't make a difference with how much hubris the head of a superpower might have. Sometimes that person, specifically that person, is the perfect vehicle for a divine message for the entire, not just for him or for this neighboring country, but for the entire world. And yes, someone like that can be a vehicle. In this case, in Paro's case was, and in President Trump's case also as well. And sometimes everyone is always looking at the small scale things. How will this affect, this little thing, or America's foreign policy, or America's relation with oil? Whereas this is an outlook which transcends the normal, regular what's in my backyard kind of outlook, and looks at a historical perspective. And sometimes it can only happen after all the other options were exhausted, to come to the conclusion that this is truth and this is the divine will. So I couldn't help myself this week but look for something in the Parsha that connected, but I actually think that these Midrashim fit quite well. So that's what I felt the need to share this week. But I think it works. I don't think it's too much of a stretch. I think it works. You're saying, so according to what I said, is Yosef of today, is he Jared Kushner? I don't know. We have to check what Jared Kushner's what his Hebrew name is. I don't know. Actually, it would be hysterical if his Hebrew name was Yosef. I'm going to search that up right now. Let's see. Let's see. Actually, I probably won't find it. I'm going to check later. But that'd be funny. Anyhow, I don't know. I don't know if Yosef is Jared Kushner, if Yosef is Bibi Netanyahu, is Yosef, John Hagee and the evangelical Christians. I have no idea. Doesn't make a difference in this case. Okay. Shavua Tov, everyone.